Good evening. My name is Carrie Novak, Town of Templeton resident, and I'm the chair of the Open Space Committee, clerk for the Ag Commission, and member of the Templeton Community Preservation Committee.
I'm George Andrews. I'm chairman of the Conservation Committee and a member of the
Community Preservation.
Community Preservation.
Hi all, I'm James McCarthy. I work as land acquisition agent for the Department of Fish and Game out of its West Boylston office. We cover all of Worcester County. So I assist the state in achieving its habitat protection goals by purchasing land for different purposes depending on where we're working. With me today are our partners in this landscape partnership grant initiative, which we're going to talk about. Jassy Bracco, the Director of Land Protection with the North County Land Trust, and Sarah Wells, Director of Land Protection for the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. Did I get that right?
And you like to introduce yourselves?
Oh, I'm Sarah. I'm with Mount Grace. Our office is over in Athol, and I live up in Orange.
Miller's River, okay. You're with Joanne Burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
I'm Jassy Bracco, North County Land Trust.
Rochelle Brown with the North County Land Trust.
Okay. And he's just an observer.
Yeah.
Dave is from the he's a member of the Conservation also.
I did.
And
Just an observer.
he's just an interested person now. Okay. Okay.
All right, we're going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you all so much for having us here today. As some of you know and some of you may not know, we're here to talk about an opportunity for the town of Templeton to participate in a landscape scale conservation project that Mass Wildlife is spearheading in this partnership with our two nonprofit partners, the North County Land Trust and the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. And this landscape partnership grant initiative we're working on is it's a really great opportunity. It's a grant program provided through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and there are different criteria you need to meet in order to be eligible for this grant program, which provides to simplify it, a 50% match towards land acquisitions. So that's what this grant program does. If you're eligible, it's a reimbursable grant program, whereas you spend the money towards these land acquisition projects up front, and if the project is eligible and approved through the grant program, the grant reimburses the conservation partners for 50% of the acquisition costs. So it's a really great program.
Close the door? Oh, more people behind you, okay. Thank you.
It's one of a handful of really great state grant programs made available to conservation partners to make it easier to fund land conservation acquisitions and things like that. Two major criteria for this grant program, to be eligible for this grant program, or this specific one is that 500 acres need to be included in terms of 500 acres need to be getting protected one way or another through the partnership in order to qualify for this grant program. So that's one of the major requirements, and that's one of the main reasons we're here tonight, and we'll get to that. And the second major requirement is that it's a partnership. So it's, I work for the Department of Fish and Game, and we're working to protect the Fernald Corporation parcels out at Norcross Hill. We would not be eligible to apply for this grant program by ourselves. It needs to be a partnership with a nonprofit partner and/or a municipality. The way we've designed this specific initiative is we're working with two nonprofits in Mount Grace and North County Land Trust. The town of Templeton was in support of our filing of the grant application, which was completed in October. And this specific grant deadline, decisions are made, or we're expecting decisions to be made sometime after the new year, probably by the beginning of February. And what that means is that if the grant that we filed in October is approved, we'll then have an approved grant contract with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we can start moving forward to actually bring these land acquisitions to a close. So are there any general questions I can answer about what I've just said there? And otherwise, I can talk more about the importance of the town's participation in this grant project.
So the 465 that we've identified, that you've identified so far, it's not necessarily contiguous. Is that an issue, or is that all right?
So the way that the grant program is structured is that the 500 acres that are needing to be protected to qualify are to be contiguous, meaning they connect to one another, or they're otherwise connected through existing open space. So one of the luxuries that we have at the Norcross Hill area is that we've got the Otter River State Forest to the north, the Templeton State Forest to the south. And in between, on these maps, you can see what is referred to as the Templeton Development Center in lime green. And so what this landscape provides for us is an opportunity to connect parcels through the existing open space in a way that you might not see in other areas. So while the Fernald Corporation, which is shown highlighted in red polygons on the map, those 465 acres are not all contiguous to one another, but they do connect to one another through the Templeton Development Center, which is shown in the light green, the lime green color there. So you can demonstrate that open space connection through the resources which are already protected under the Massachusetts Constitution. So to cover that again, is we've got the Otter River State Forest, the Templeton State Forest, and the Commonwealth-owned portions of the Templeton Development Center. And in total, we're working with 2,300 acres of protected open space, on the Royalston, Phillipston, Templeton line. And what this project aims to do is add an additional at least 500 acres to that 2,300 acre block of protected land, which would make it one of the largest contiguous protected open spaces, owner protected in Worcester County, for sure, top 5 or top 3. It's a really fantastic area. So again, just have to have the opportunity to add conservation land to what's already protected out there, and to be able to use a state grant, which is going to provide a lot of the purchase monies. It's a great opportunity, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do it. Neither Mass Wildlife or the Land Trust could purchase or could fund these land protection projects on our own. So we're trying to take advantage of this unique state grant program to ask the state to help us pay for it, and in process protect a whole lot of land at the same time. So we're working with the 465 acres shown in red, and we've got a 35-acre gap to get to the 500 acres. And it's always the challenge in these large landscape-style projects. When we filed the grant application in October, we had an additional landowner that had demonstrated significant interest in working with us. The Bosler Humane Society parcel to the northeast. I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with that property. It's off of Royalston Road, Route 68. It's about a 190-acre property in total. And we had significant interest on behalf of the folks over at the Bosler Humane Society to contribute towards this project, and by contribute, I mean protect some of their land so we can get to the 500 acres. Now, we're working to hopefully have the Bosler Humane Society keep with us on this project, but there has been some second thoughts on their behalf as to whether or not the Bosler Humane Society wants to participate. So what we're doing as a partnership is trying to explore other opportunities to make sure we get to the 500-acre threshold. So again, we're holding out hope that our original configuration of the Fernald properties and the Bosler Humane Society, we're hoping that both of those property owners decide to move forward. The Fernald Corporation is 100% interested in working with us on this project. So it was a bit of a shame that the Bosler Humane Society folks lost some interest, and shouldn't say they lost interest. It's there's a board of directors which is in charge of making all decisions at the Bosler Humane Society. And what we've been told, it's sort of been indicated to us, is that there are some questions amongst the board members which may have led to some second guessing as to whether or not they wanted to sell some land. Again, we're hoping that they do decide to stick with us and participate in this project. And just to reiterate, but we're here today to talk about the town's, the option for the town to participate, which would get us closer to the 500 acres. And this is one of a few different landowners we're also working with at the same time. So it's sort of it's very much a dynamic and a complex landscape style project, but due to the fact that we've got a very strong partnership, and we've worked on a number of these landscape partnership grant projects before, we're very confident in our ability to make this happen. So the two town parcels that I've been referring to are properties that are held for general municipal purposes by the town, which means they're not permanently protected. They're just town-owned properties. One of them was acquired for non-payment of taxes, and the other property, which is listed by the town assessors as being held by the town of Templeton, does not have a deed reference, so we're not exactly sure when the town acquired that property. But what we would do if the town was interested in moving forward is we would assist the town in doing title researches on both of these properties to make sure that the title is clear, that the town does in fact hold clear title to these properties, that they're held for general municipal purposes and therefore are eligible to be conserved. So I've got some handouts on the two town parcels specifically, and I've also got a copy of the deed for the property that was acquired for non-payment of taxes. I'm happy to pass some of that around if that might be helpful. I see you've got the tax cards there.
Yeah, Board of Health gave us a copy of the tax card.
Okay.
It looks like the same thing he's got.
Okay.
Yeah, it is, that's,
Yeah, so the Town of Templeton parcel, which is, it's map 3-07, parcel 58, is the parcel that I'm not exactly sure when the town acquired it, because I couldn't find the deed reference, but it is listed by the town. It's shown in a butter's survey plan as being Town of Templeton property. So that's obviously something that we would want to look into the title to make sure that the town does in fact hold clear title to that property. And the second town parcel is map 4-2, parcel 2. And that parcel was acquired by the town for non-payment of taxes, I believe in 1965, I think.
Do you know anything about these two pieces? Are they wetland? Are they open? Are they?
They are primarily upland wooded lots. They're landlocked. They don't have any legal frontage. They're assessed by the town as having very low value landlocked parcels. I don't have the map in front of me because I handed all my copies out. But actually, I've got a picture. Actually, this would be helpful. So this is an aerial photo of map 3-7 parcel 58, which is the southerlymost of the blue parcels.
this one over here.
This one? Yeah, looks like trees.
It definitely looks like trees.
And, okay, so yeah, so that map, map 3-7 parcel 58 is the southerlymost on your map there, which it's called out. And then the other parcel is map 4-2 parcel 2, which is a 12-acre lot. The other one was 15 acres. And that's an aerial photo.
Shut it off, Red. Gotta pick on him.
And that's an aerial photo.
And this is the other one,
Of
this
the
is
other one.
basically
So they're both
same thing.
upland, heavily, mature wood lots, essentially, mature forest.
Yeah.
And they qualify by virtue of the fact that they're contiguous to the state forests, Otter River and Templeton.
That's right, so
Right.
going back to, if they don't directly abut, can you demonstrate the connection through existing open space, which is what we can do here.
Okay.
So, these Town of Templeton parcels are worthy of conservation, regardless of the fact that we're working on this large landscape scale project. It was convenient that we were looking at backup options to make sure that we got to the 500-acre threshold, and we found these two. So it made sense that we would reach out to the town and ask if they would be interested in participating with us, so that we can ensure we get to the 500 acres that we need. And also because the town was so gracious in giving us letters of support towards our grant application, that we thought, this could be a good opportunity that the town might be very much interested in doing.
85.
As I'm sure most of the folks in this room know, it was at the last May or June town meeting, there was an article in the warrant for a landscape, or a land grant, whereas the town was gonna purchase a couple of the Fernald Corporation parcels. I don't know if you folks were aware of that, but there was a proposal where the town had applied for this other state grant, a separate state grant program, but similar, whereby the town was going to acquire some of the Fernald Corporation parcels, and the state was gonna, again, reimburse. And I believe that grant program provides up to a 52% match, or something of that nature. But a very similar grant program, whereas the town could buy the land, be reimbursed for 50% of the acquisition costs. And it went to town meeting. There was a majority vote, as I understand it, but it didn't
Yeah,
have,
it just wasn't a super
didn't have the
majority.
2/3 majority vote. So that's evidence to us as the partners in this project that there is some support in town for further conservation out here, which is why we wanted to reach out to the town to make them aware of in October that we were filing this grant application. And, you know, from my perspective and being a land agent for Fish and Game, looking at the numbers, the acreages that we can possibly protect, while it would have been great for the town to have approved the project last spring, or last June, for the town to acquire a portion of the Fernald property, this proposal actually provides a much stronger opportunity, I think, to the local community, in that it wouldn't just be a portion of the Fernald Corporation lands, it would be the entirety of the Fernald Corporation properties. That we can guarantee it's gonna be permanently protected, and, you know, that the land composition, the land use, the conservation, open space nature of the property is not gonna change. That's gonna stay the same way that folks in town have known and enjoyed it out as they're driving through that portion of Norcross Hill through the Templeton Development Center. You know, the hay fields that are out there now are gonna stay open and managed for agriculture. One of the things that Fish and Game always does when it acquires agricultural fields is it typically grandfathers for a period up to 5 years back to the previous owner or the previous owner's representative the ability to go out and hay the fields or to manage those fields. That's something the Fish and Game typically does anyways, as they grandfather for 5 years, particularly when we have a farmer or a landowner who's been managing the fields to a high quality. And yes,
Is there restrictions on when they can cut the hay?
there may be, once Fish and Game acquires the land, there will probably be recommendations as to when the cuts are done, as to avoid, for example, nesting, grassland nesting birds during the sensitive periods for grassland nesting birds and things like that. In my experience in working with our agricultural lease farmers, I haven't really heard much of I haven't really heard any negative feedback about being restricted to cutting at certain times. We'd certainly want to provide guidance on when the cuts were done, but I don't think it should detrimentally affect your ability to go out there and do.
'Cause I hold a lease on this,
Mr. Tolman?
yeah.
Nice to meet you. I've been working with Keith Ross from Landvest, and I know that you have a lease until 2019 on the fields, and Fish and Game would grant, you know, so if Fish and Game were to acquire the property by June 30th of 2019, we would typically grandfather to June 30th, 2024, for you to continue maintaining the fields if that's something you wanted to do.
Yeah,
Yep, and,
because when Tom Fang, the attorney
Mhm.
called me up and said that they would want me off there by June and not allow me to finish up my lease.
mhm,
Well, with all the fertilizer and everything I put down, the investment I made, June is when we start cutting hay,
mhm,
and usually finish up the end of September, 1st of October.
mhm.
So maybe this isn't the place to discuss it, but I would like to continue the lease till
Absolutely.
December.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Frayne may have just been mistaken in his explanation to you. There's a lot of people involved, you know, in trying to get that property under control. But Keith Ross, who is the listing broker, is very knowledgeable about how Fish and Game operates after acquiring land. And I talked to Keith as recently as this morning about that issue. So I think Mr. Frayne was mistaken in what he said to you. But I'm going to follow up with you after this meeting, and we'll talk more. But I'm sure, I'm pretty confident that I can put to bed any concerns you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Christoph Sheridan with the Templeton Ag Board. I didn't catch your name.
I'm James McCarthy. I work as a land acquisition agent for the Department of Fish and Game
Okay.
out of the West Boylston office.
Sorry,
Nice to
I was
meet
a
you.
couple minutes late. So who would, if this is a partnership of is it the Grace Conservation,
Mount Grace.
Mount Grace, and then the town of Templeton, and then the Mass Fish and Wildlife, whatever, who owns it in perpetuity? Who makes the rules?
Yep.
What kind of rules are there? Is it open to the public? And if it's open to the public, how does that impact the agricultural uses of it? And, you know, if somebody's leasing it for agricultural uses, is there opportunity to maintain that and develop it? And then is there hunting and fishing that's allowed on it? And
Yeah.
how's all that come together? There's a lot of different things going on there.
Yeah, there's lots of all great questions, and so our partnership is with the North Carolina Land Trust, Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust, and Mass Wildlife, Department of Fish and Game. We're the same entity. In order to qualify for this grant program, each of the partners needs to be contributing something contributing money towards the project, and holding an interest at the end of the day is ultimately what it comes down to. So this proposal contemplates Fish and Game purchasing the entire 465 acres owned by the Walter E. Fernald Corporation, owning it in fee interest, completely unrestricted. So if we do that, if we acquire it, it will be managed as any other wildlife management area, So it could be utilized for passive recreational pursuits by the general public, hunting, fishing, trail walking, nature-based studies, things of that nature. So if you've ever hunted or recreated on a WMA, if you're familiar with the Mass Wildlife Rules and Regulations, those would all apply to the Fernald Corporation parcels. That would be a brand-new wildlife management area. So now our partners in the Mount Grace and North County Land Trusts, any interest that they acquire through this landscape partnership grant, those properties would be under the purview of what their organizations allow. But, land trusts, similar to Mass Wildlife, allow public access, and similar types of passive recreational use opportunities. So our land trusts are working with, we've got 2 or 3 potential other landowners that we'd like to bring in. I mentioned, I think before you got here, this is the Bosler Humane Society.
No, I heard that, yeah.
Okay. So our grant application contemplated the North County Land Trust purchasing a portion of the Bosler Humane Society and the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust holding a conservation easement on top of that. So this grant program requires that interests are shared under certain situations. So if a town or a land trust acquires an interest in a property through this grant program, they need to share that interest with each other. So that's why, we contemplated the North County buying it and then the Mount Grace Land Trust holding a CR, because that's what the grant program requires. They like to see sort of the partners working with each other to, I guess, maximize protection, if you will. Whereas Fish and Game being a state agency, we don't have to co-hold interests. So rather than us purchasing the Fernald Corporation land and then placing a conservation easement on top of it, we can just own the land itself.
So the town of Templeton would then own or contribute to the whole thing, these 2 other parcels, and that would be their shared interest, and then,
Yeah. So,
but Mass Fish and Wildlife would own that 457, 465.
yeah. So so there can be a number. Yeah. So there can be a number of different acquisitions that go into getting to the 500 acres. So in some of these grant projects, you've got dozens of landowners to get to 500 acres. This one, we've got the core landowner being the Fernald Corporation, the 465 acres. Fish and Game Lands Committee, our Lands Committee has approved to purchase this property, contingent upon the successful award of this grant. So we've got half of the monies earmarked for purchasing Fernald Corporation right now. We've got the Fernald Corporation property under agreement, so we're working directly with the Fernald Corporation at this point. So it's a matter of getting to the 500 acres, working with our partners. Initially thought the Bosler Humane Society would be the second and only other landowner we needed to work with. Again, we're holding out hope that they do decide to stick with us, but it's at this point we want to be safe and reach out to the town of Templeton, and we're working with other private landowners who may decide to join with us. And so it's very possible, it's quite likely that we'll get over 500 acres without having the Bosler Humane Society property with us at all. But we're in a position now, before the grant comes out, where we're working diligently to bring in as many acres and landowners as we can. And the town of Templeton parcels are a great opportunity to help really significantly close that gap. The 27 acres owned by the town, again, we think are eligible because they connect to the other existing protected open space. They've got very similar habitat resource values, which the grant program administrators should be very happy to see. And, then there's the question of if the town of Templeton is interested in participating, how do they do that? So there's a couple of different options that we've got on the fact sheet that Sarah has provided for us today. And so one of the options, when town owns property which is held for general municipal purposes, is the town can convey it, or the town can transfer care and control to the Conservation Commission. So what that basically does is, rather than being owned just by the town in general, it still stays, the title remains under the town's ownership, but the care and control gets transferred to the Conservation Commission. And in Massachusetts, when property is held by a town under the care and control of the Conservation Commission, that counts as protected open space. So that's one option if the town is interested in assisting us and adding to this really great project. Is, the town could consider retaining title to these lands, but then transferring to their own Conservation Commission, which would render them then protected, and that would count towards the 500 acres being protected as part of this project. Currently now, this in being held in general ownership, the town has they're not obligated to conserve the land. By transferring it to the care and control of the Conservation Commission, we would be securing that conservation status, and it would count towards the 500 acres as well. So that's one opportunity that the townsfolk people could consider, and it's one that other towns have done in similar situations to reach similar goals. Another option, which I had talked to the town administrator, Mr. Terenzini, about, was conveying the land, the fee interest in the land themselves from the town to, say, Fish and Game. If that's something that the town, rather than see it protected by transferring care and control to the Conservation Commission, if the town would rather not hold the land anymore, they could sell the title, convey the title to Fish and Game. And that could happen through a donation or through a sale. So there are different options for the town to consider in terms of how do we achieve a conservation status and what makes the most sense for the town. One of the ideas Mr. Terenzini mentioned to me on the phone was that the town might have interest in harvesting timber on these parcels. Now, that's something that the town can do, anyways, but we could incorporate that also into part of this deal, whereas if the town wanted to conserve these properties, but they wanted to sell them to the state, we could work with the town so that the town could harvest some timber as part of the transaction, which is actually what we're proposing with the Fernald Corporation lands, is that they harvest some of the timber on the property as part of the closing with Mass Wildlife, which it's a benefit for both Fernald Corporation and some benefit for Mass Wildlife, because they would see some additional revenue through a timber harvest, which is what the town could also see in a similar situation. And also, Mass Wildlife is getting property with enhanced habitat resources right off the bat. If you've ever been out to the Patrol Hollow area in Hardwick, off Patrol Hollow Road, the Muddy Brook area, Mass Wildlife has been very active in reclaiming these open savanna type properties. Basically, they're removing 60 to 70% of the canopy cover in some of these areas and sort of reclaiming an open landscape to what you used to see a couple hundred years ago in some cases. And it's really great for the wildlife too. So that's just to say that, the town could potentially consider a timber cut component as part of this conservation project, similar to the Fernald Corporation, which could provide additional revenue for the town, and it would certainly improve habitat, resource values and conditions.
I understood the Fernald Corporation had the timber rights for another 5 to 10 years.
No, I think what you may have heard is that we've been discussing granting a limited timber license agreement back to the Fernald Corporation after a closing, which is something that Fish and Game does not uncommonly, actually, in a lot of land deals, where it'll buy the property and the previous owner has a period of up to, say, 3 years to continue cutting timber, subject to state-approved forest cutting plans and, with consultation with Mass Wildlife, Habitat and Forestry Section folks. So it's a way that we can sort of lean on the former landowners, so they can get their contractors out there and they can do the work to our standards, and we end up with a benefit.
I'm also confused about conservation and then conserving the property, but then hunting it. Is it gonna be restricted to hunting, protected land, or like it is now?
As some of you folks probably know better than I do, the Templeton Development Center and the Fernald Corporation properties have not been open to hunting. Right, there's an area that's open to hunting, a restricted area that's open to bow hunting, I believe, at the Templeton Development Center. But until now, those properties are not open to unrestricted hunting, as you would find on a state-owned wildlife management area. When Fish and Game purchases the Fernald Corporation parcels, it will be open to hunting and fishing. And as far as hunting goes, you have to observe the road and occupied dwelling setbacks and things like that, as you would anywhere else. But there would be no additional restrictions on the property.
I see.
That kind of piggybacks on the second part of my question. Is the, up in the Gardner prison, is that a Mass Fish and Wildlife area all around the Gardner prison?
Yes, that's the High Ridge Wildlife Management Area.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because that's kind of I used to work for a guy that did all the hay for a number of years up there, doing the hay.
Yep.
And I also used to hunt up there, pheasant, duck, and different stuff. And then, so it just, I'm not familiar with the Mass Fish and Wildlife rules and regs as you are, but I saw even back then, there was a little bit of a conflict of interest there, because you had just from the town's perspective as the agricultural commission side of it, we would want to protect the agricultural use of that. It's kind of a historic thing in the town, and it's pretty one of a kind, as you mentioned. So to have hikers walking all over crops, or hunters walking all over crops, I guess what is the philosophy of Fish and Wildlife, are you gonna prioritize the open space in the fields to be used for agricultural purposes? Is that part of it, or after that 5 years, do you prioritize meadows and pasture for hunting and fishing, you know? How does all that come together, just so from us as a town, we're seeing, okay, what's the future? We see 5 years of hay being cut, and then what, you know? What's the priority / philosophy of Mass Fish and Wildlife?
Yeah, so at High Ridge and Gardner, it's, we do 5-year agricultural lease agreements, right? So, I can't recall the guy's name you're mentioning, but, what's that?
Paul Lane, but it's been a while since
Yeah.
I've been up there.
So, when Mass Wildlife acquires a property, as we said, for the first 5 years, the ag uses are grandfathered back to the previous, land manager or farmer owner. After that, we put it out to public bid, which is what we're obligated to do. So, just like at High Ridge or any other agricultural fields that we put out they're subject to agricultural license agreements with farmers, they go out to public bid, and you can bid on them, and the high bidder wins. And when that person is selected, I believe it's automatically you get 5 years to farm the property. Essentially, the way it works. At the end of that 5-year period, you know, it goes back out to public bid, but there's a really good chance that you could win that bid again, depending on where you are. So we've had some farmers in some areas that get that bid, you know, pretty regularly, every 5 years. Unfortunately, some, go ahead.
Yeah, up there, it seems like some of the fields got put into, like, you know, pastures for animal. I mean, if you go pheasant hunting, it's in fields. It's not, and then there's some fields that are still in agricultural use. So I'm just wondering, how does that balance of use of your timber versus fields versus what gets designated as a pasture to become a hunting area? Or is that not something that's done? Just up there, there's kind of all those things happening on open land.
Yeah, and those are all really good questions. And, you know, I'm not a land manager, so I don't have probably all the best answers for a lot of those questions. You know, we've got staff that specifically is dedicated to managing properties and doing the license agreements, and I know a fair amount about it. You know, what I can say is that, you know, I don't think, so when the fields go out to agricultural, under agricultural license agreements with the farmers that are gonna be managing and maintaining them, we're not, you know, micromanaging them when they're out there, whatever
Sure.
crops they're growing. I think in some cases at High Ridge, we've had fields that have gone fallow for a couple of years because the person who had won the bid didn't actually
Take care of them.
do anything with it. So that's something we struggle with. It's unfortunately, it's an issue, you know, when we try to provide this benefit to the folks to go out there and bid publicly on these properties, to go out there and farm them. I think one of the risks you run is people not being the best stewards of the land. So depending on where the ag fields are and what type of habitat they might support, like, so for example, certain grassland nesting birds, most grassland nesting birds need a really large area, really large field for it to be breeding habitat. So some fields, you know, we're not gonna be managing for you know, grassland nesting birds because they're too small. The Fernald Corporation properties, for example, not only are they a really great agricultural resource, but they're also really great for wildlife. So at some point down the line, our habitat folks in Westboro might decide they want to do a targeted management project in those fields to specifically benefit, I don't know, prairie warbler or something, you know, so that's a possibility, but I'd say more likely than not, the fields would function as if we typically do on other WMAs, where we put it out to public bid, someone can win that bid and then farm the fields, and we work on it that way. I don't know that I officially addressed your question. I'm trying to, but.
No, I mean, it's really, if they're supportive of agriculture, and you're basically saying, yes, they are, but they're also supportive of habitats, and I'm just, like, for example, you take a field like that, if somebody's not clearing the edges, it creeps in, it creeps in,
Right.
it creeps in. And so if it's, oh no, that's the natural way of the forest, we want it to creep in and creep in. Obviously, if you're limiting a farmer from cutting back the tree line, for example, but it sounds like as long as you've got a responsible guy that takes the bid, he can pretty much, you know,
Yeah.
do good agricultural practices in there and really upkeep that open land for agricultural purposes, and for the most part, Mass Fish and Wildlife, aside from a little bit of habitat stuff here and there, is supportive of that.
Yeah, I think what you said is pretty representative of the way that we function, and yeah, and we do have those field edges that start to creep in, and you get those saplings that are hard to cut down, but and you lose the stone walls too. So, we don't, that's not something that we don't suggest that the field edges don't get cut. Sometimes it happens just as a result of people not being good managers of the property.
Is there any way to, is this gonna have to go before town floor? Is that how we do this?
So,
It's gonna
I'm
end up-
imagining that we probably first have to approach the selectmen to see what their interest is,
Yeah.
and see what option they're more comfortable with, and then if they're on board with it, once we determine the option, it would have to go to town meeting. Is that what Carter was telling you?
yeah, so, we talked, when Carter and I talked, we essentially, there are the two options I mentioned, the Conservation Commission getting care and control,
Right.
or it going to the state. Carter and I talked about the state acquiring the land specifically when we spoke on the phone, just because that was really the main option that came up. And we talked about it having to go to town meeting. And, if the town did decide they would like to see the land be conveyed to Fish and Game, maybe a recommendation could be made, to the Board of Selectmen, and obviously we'd have to wait to a town meeting vote. But we could be working with recommendations and things like that. And, but the other option where the town would keep title to the land and transfer care and control to the Conservation Commission, that's a question where I don't think as partners we discussed this, we don't know that has to go to town meeting.
The grant would not require it to go to town meeting, because there's no
Okay.
amount of money that we're asking the town to spend, and there's no grant money that could come through to this, because with the town already owning it, it's automatically not eligible to get any grant funding, which is kind of a bummer, because it's owned for general municipal purposes. It's not already conservation land, so we think it would be a nice way to get some money to the towns, but it's just not on the table as an option. So it would really be up to the select board and town council about whether you wanted to go to town meeting for disposing of that property. And if they think it still counts as a disposition, if it's just going to another town body.
Thank you.
Would there, if I might, would there be, I mean, obviously, I'm generally for this. I think it's a beautiful area. I'd love to see it preserved, and it's a huge asset we have here in Templeton, that whole area. But and we have relatively small leverage, right? You're bringing the deal to the table. It's a good deal. You need a couple parcels from the town to make it happen, or would like to, and you want to get the partnership of all three. But would there be any, is there any way of putting any kind of a, at least, the town of Templeton's are entering into this agreement with the idea that, we want to preserve the agricultural land. We don't want it to be a deer preserve in the next, in 6 years. Is there any way to write any kind of language like that into it?
So like as a sort of a contingency of the town's participation, that there could be some restrictions placed on the fields.
Even if it was a goodwill, I mean, even if it wasn't legally binding, but it sounds like all the goodwill's there on Mass Fish and Wildlife, but if that was, that would be, Carrie, you're on the Ag Board with me. I don't know what your opinion is. Andre, you're on the Ag Board. There's three of us on the Ag Board here tonight, but I think, at least from, if we were consulted, which we're here because we were asked to come, I don't see if that was a possibility to say that, that's our recommendation to the town anyway, would be to say, hey, let's recommend that we keep the ag land, because it's beautiful as ag land. We'd hate to see it grow up as, something else. It's
Yeah.
part of our history and et cetera, but I don't know if that,
Yeah,
As part of this whole project, I think, I'm just curious, you're an acquisition person, so do you have, like the land management team that writes a land management plan for this piece of land, or, is there an official land management plan for the land, or?
So the property is actually currently subject to approved forest stewardship plans.
Okay.
And those were put in place to identify how the timber is gonna be cut and managed in the property. So those forest stewardship plans, as we talked about, the timber license agreement, which Mass Wildlife intends to grant back to the Fernald Corporation, those forest stewardship plans would be observed and respected as part of that process. Mass Wildlife does not develop land management plans for each one of its properties. When there's a specific habitat improvement project taking place, there's a lot that goes into something like that. There's a full plan that goes into, say, if there was an invasive species mitigation type project or something like that. There's a full-on type of a prescription written and followed through. Our wildlife management areas, we don't draft management plans for them, probably because of the fact that we own so much land in the state, and that draft a management plan for each one of our properties would be entirely time-consuming, and not only that, but then I think it sort of keeps the agency on the hook for actually having to carry out management actions, which in some cases, and it's funny, but in some cases it's not reasonable to, when we have over 250,000 acres of protected open space in the state. It breaks down to basically 50,000 per district. My office is one district, so we've got 8 guys that work there. It's a lot of acreage to be managing and be responsible for. I think Mass Wildlife does a great job of being good stewards of its land, and they've got a brand-new stewardship department. There's a new stewardship biologist in each district office. We've got a new fee stewardship coordinator in Westboro. We've got a conservation restriction stewardship coordinator in Westboro. All that to say is that stewardship is a very, very high priority for Mass Fish and Game, but management plans are not something we typically do. But I think I would refer back to any of the many, many properties we own that we purchased that have agricultural fields that are still open for agriculture. This site specifically, I think the last thing Fish and Game would want to do is to see the quality of those fields deteriorate, or for them to revert back to anything other than what they are now. In fact, having the Fernald Corporation do the timber cut that we talked about, having that open field with the associated edge habitat, the variation of the different habitats that are going to be out there it's going to be awesome for for wildlife, excuse me. And I don't see Mass Wildlife ever having an intention to change what those fields currently provide, both for agriculture and for wildlife.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry to have missed your first part of your presentation, but am I to understand now that you have worked or are working on an arrangement with the Fernald Corporation the state owned part of it and the Fernald owned a portion of it. Have you been able to acquire the Fernald portion, or is that something that you're anticipating?
So our hope through this project is to acquire the 465 acres owned by the Fernald Corporation. So it's a private nonprofit entity. So around the Fernald Corporation is the Templeton Development Center, which is owned by the Commonwealth under the care and control of DCAM, the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. And I think your question is, at some point, is that Commonwealth-owned property, is that going to be transferred to another agency? Is that sort of what you're asking?
Well, I'm a member of the Open Space Committee here in town. And
Yeah.
we had worked on trying to arrange the purchase that you were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And with the dealings with the Fernald Corporation, we weren't sure how they were going to, whether they were going to accept our offer.
That's
or
right.
not. And I was wondering if you had succeeded in doing anything more than we had.
Oh, yeah, so, we talked about how the difference between the grant application that you worked on was a great grant application. This is also a great grant application, but it's even better to the extent that we're including all of the Fernald land. So last year you worked on the 120 acre portion, I believe. And the Fernald Corporation, I don't think, ever accepted the town's offer, even though the town put forth all this energy and time to file the grant application. The Fernald Corporation never accepted it. It's different now. Not only are we including all the 465 acres, but we're working with Landvest, which is a specialized real estate company, and they're directly representing the Fernald Corporation. So it was on the open market, or it still is on the open market under an agreement with Fish and Game at this point. Whereas when you first worked on it, it wasn't even listed, I don't believe.
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
No,
So
well,
it's just-
it was just starting to be listed towards the end of
Yeah,
it.
so the major difference this time is that the Fernald Corporation was ready to sell. They enlisted Landvest to see that happen, and they're motivated. So, we've got, I'm extremely confident in my ability to at least, keep that as part of this project. Those 465 acres are, we've got, like I said, we've got a commitment with the Fernald Corporation, so they're working exclusively with us. And they're also aware of the fact that we need this state grant in order to make everything happen. So everything is sort of contingent, not sort of, everything is contingent. Everything's contingent upon our ability to get the 500 acres together so that our grant application can be approved and we can keep things moving forward. And I think if the town of Templeton is interested in working with us, I'm extremely confident that we're going to get there. And we're going to keep working regardless to make sure we get to 500 acres. But I think these two town of Templeton parcels present a great opportunity for not only us, but for the town as well to see these conserved. And based on where they're located, being landlocked properties of of already having good conservation value, it sort of seems to make sense to add to the protected landscape. So yes, to answer your question, I do anticipate that we will acquire all of that acreage. Yeah.
Would it be appropriate for me to ask how much you guys are paying for it?
Not at all. It was listed at $1.4 million, or $3,000 per acre, and we had an appraisal done, which is what Fish and Game does anytime it purchases a property. We are held to the sort of the same standards as a bank. You know, we can't overpay. We had an appraisal done. It supported the $1.4 million, and so our option with our purchase and sale agreement, or actually it's an option agreement. It's not an official purchase and sale. It's Fish and Game's version of a purchase and sale agreement, but we've got this option signed with the Fernald Corporation at the $1.4 million purchase price, or $3,000 per acre, contingent upon half of that, $700,000, coming through the successful award of this grant. So Fish and Game would never, the $1.4 million represents a massive percentage of our annual budget statewide. And if I had proposed that Fish and Game purchase it with just its own monies, it wouldn't have happened. So the reason that the Lands Committee is supportive of paying that money, which was supported by appraisal, is because we're hoping to get this grant. And if we could, it would be a really great thing. And I think it's a once in a very unique opportunity that might not come back around again. Just to say that, the Fernald Corporation is motivated to sell. We've got this grant program, which, these things come and go, as we've come to learn in our field, and we don't know how long these grant programs are gonna be around for. But, we've got a good opportunity in front of us. And
Well, a lot of us are neighbors to that property and grew up there. And we always fear it being developed for houses and stuff, so that's one good thing. It's not gonna be if you guys get it, so.
Right.
So where do we go from here?
Well, could I first ask Jesse and Sarah, did I miss anything? Is there anything you guys want to contribute at all? Correct me on anything? No? Okay.
One thing that always comes up when working with towns is the effect on the tax roll. And in this case, it's helpful that the two parcels we're talking about are already off the tax rolls because they're owned by the town. So if you were to convey them to the Conservation Commission or Mass Wildlife, there's no effect. And same goes with the Fernald School land. It's big acreage, but it's already off the tax rolls because they're a nonprofit. So there's not a net loss of any tax revenue for the towns. I think that's pretty important. And similarly, the private landowner that Jassy and I and James are talking with, they're considering a conservation restriction, so their land would stay on the tax rolls and they'd keep paying what they've been paying. So I think that might be helpful in some other conversations at the town level. And one question I would have for all of you is if you're supportive of the idea of this, if you'd be willing to help convey that to the select board, and then if it does end up at a town meeting floor situation, because I think we can all know that if it's someone like James, as great as James is, or one of us, the three of us are outsiders. So if you're able to talk to your peers and other taxpayers in Templeton, it'll go way further than any of the three of us saying it's a good project, because some people will think, rightly so, well, who cares?
Right.
Do you have a time limit? I mean, did they specify the Fernald Corp?
Yes.
When you can have to get this done by, or?
Yeah, so Fish and Game's fiscal year runs July 1st to June 30th. The folks in Boston, who the grants program administrators, they run the same fiscal year. Our goal is to close by the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, 2019, which that timeline should be manageable, assuming that the grant is approved. The Fernald Corporation property is fully surveyed. We've already done the appraisal, so we should be in good position to close before the end of the fiscal year, which would be June 30th, 2019. But this specific grant, the application that we filed, we provided ourselves with the opportunity to perhaps extend the grant into fiscal year 2020 if we needed to, just to give ourselves the flexibility. I don't see the Fernald Corporation property extending into FY20, but if, for example, one of the land trust projects needs to extend into August or September just to bring money together or whatever it might be, we should have the flexibility to do that too. But yeah, the option agreement that I mentioned between Mass Wildlife and Fernald Corporation specifies June 30th, 2019 as the closing.
I want to point out something too that, I don't know if you're aware of it. But the main road from Worcester to Brattleboro, Vermont, Stagecoach Road, runs right up through that property. It's still there in the woods. So it's quite a historic area, and there used to be a big inn right up on the corner. And there's a cemetery there also. We've been taking care of it, because nobody does.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know if you was aware of that.
Yeah, we contacted the Massachusetts Historical Commission as part of our grant filing, and they sent us a letter telling us about the archaeological resources at the Norcross Hill Cemetery. Maybe I could meet you out there someday and you could show me some of that. That'd be great. Yeah,
Anytime.
okay. Yeah, look forward to that.
Well, I can certainly, on the ag board side, I can certainly, at our next meeting, try and see if everyone else is in support, and if they are, we can send a letter to the select board,
Yeah.
just to have, one voice saying that we're in support of that.
That's great feedback, thank you.
But
One
I'm,
more question.
oh, okay, you go first.
The Bosler Humane Society, I would assume if they were going to work a deal together, they're not gonna allow hunting on their property.
That's fair insight to have. Yeah, we talked about what recreational uses would be allowed when we were speaking initially with the society, and hunting was one of the activities which probably would not be allowed if that moves forward. But that's sort of the nature of how conservation goes sometimes. But that, and again, Mass Wildlife wouldn't have an interest in that property anyways. So typically, anything that Mass Wildlife engages in, whether it be buying the land itself or holding a conservation easement, anything that we have an interest in, we typically require that it be open for hunting and fishing. But when nonprofits are working to conserve a property, you have to be flexible in times and respecting landowners' wishes and things like that, particularly when, a property like that where they'd still have the facilities in close proximity. And
Sort of back to my question, and I'm sure you think you answered it, but I need very concrete steps.
Yeah.
So I need to know what do we need to do next? Where do we go from here? Because I don't want to walk out the room and say, oh, this is great, and then June comes and we haven't done anything. So I think what I hear you saying is that the open space, community pres, conservation, ag, and our separate boards need to talk about whether we're in support. Is just a letter or a meeting with the select board enough? Is that what our next step is? Determining our own interest and then meeting with the boards or writing a letter of support to the Board of Selectmen? Is that kind of the next step that you're visualizing here?
well, I'm gonna defer to Sarah here to answer for me because she's got a lot more experience.
Have you already approached the select board or the town
No,
as
so,
a whole?
no,
So
so,
they don't even really know about this, officially at least.
right.
Mr. Carter
So
hasn't
that would
said
be the
nothing.
first step, I would think.
Isn't this a public hearing, Dennis? This is a public
Well,
hearing.
I posted this as a public meeting for all of our boards, yeah,
Yeah, so the select board knows about it, because you're not here.
yeah. I suppose that's a fair point.
They weren't specifically invited.
They weren't specifically invited, no, I just put it on the town agenda.
It might be best to send some kind of a letter or something.
Or attend the meeting.
Letting them know.
Yeah,
what-
probably better to get them on, to get on their meeting board, one of their board
Yeah.
meetings, and talk to them about it at their board meeting.
Right. It just seems like probably our own boards need to make sure that we're all speaking in harmony before we then present ourselves.
It might be
Yes.
good to have a representative though also attend that meeting.
Yeah.
If we could do that. Is that something that would be feasible or?
I'm certainly able to attend a select board meeting, if that's the next step.
Yeah, does that sound like that's our next step?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, because what we'd like to be able to do is contact the state grant administrators and let them know that we have these additional parcels.
Yep.
So for that to have any weight, then whoever the ultimate decision maker is for Templeton, if that's the select board, then they'll need something along the lines of a letter at some point, which we can help you draft, and that'll
Mhm.
be straightforward if we get to that point. So whatever you think, you're in the best position to know how to get to that point for the select board to weigh in and be in support of it.
Seems to me, though, if the town is gonna sell the property to them then the select board can't do much more than say, we'll present it at town meeting, right?
That would be a good first step, though.
Yeah,
And they have to
say,
start getting things on the,
Yeah.
warrant as soon as
But you have one or
possible.
two steps, if we donate it and keep control of it under the conservation, or we sell it directly to Fish and Wildlife.
but that's one of the
Two options.
answers you need, right, is if that counts, or do you know that that counts? If it's transferred to the care and protection of conservation, does that count towards the acreage?
Yes.
It does?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that-
we have that answer.
That should be
That'll-
what we push for, because if we have an opportunity to do it without going before town floor, it would be a hell of a lot easier.
And more timely.
Yeah, and more timely for
Yeah,
a whole
and
variety of
where,
reasons.
where it's a lot of timberland, as it shows in the pictures, they're gonna wanna be able to go in there and, de-log it.
These
So
are
that's what
land-
they've done for 4 other parcels here in town over the last year.
Uh-huh.
That's what was one of their decisions to keep money in the town. They did behind the highway barn, the old dump, and a couple other places.
And the state grant administrators do know that there's, if it ends up needing to go to town meeting floor, that the select board can't guarantee
Okay.
anything ahead of that, so they, yeah, conservation commissions are one of the eligible applicants for this grant. So they have that worked in, and they help advise about how to draft the vote language even. I'm sorry, I think you were gonna say something.
Both of these lots though are landlocked, is that correct? And
Mhm.
so access to that would have to be,
There's legal access, there's just not public road frontage.
Helicopter, Dennis.
Yeah.
okay.
We'll get the logs out with a drone.
Yep.
There you go.
The northerly one, I think you could probably access through the Templeton Development Center.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one on Norcross Hill,
Yeah,
on, Elliott Hill.
Elliott Hill, right, yeah. And the southerly one, I'm sure there's an access road to the Templeton State Forest where DCR's probably been managing their property, where you can get in there with logging equipment.
Okay.
I can't say for sure, but I would assume there's a will, there's a way we could,
I'm sure that the will is.
And being it's in the Templeton, for the lower ones in Templeton Forest, they can get into it somehow because they're gonna do the forest anyhow.
Okay, so
Alright.
do we have a plan or?
You got a plan, Dennis?
No, don't leave it to me to plan. We
So-
should,
what we can do, I can summarize our meeting in a letter, an email.
Yeah.
With our understanding of the proposed next steps, based on what we talked about, and we can send that out, just so it's all fresh. And then maybe that can be distributed to the different committees who then wanna decide if they wanna put together a letter of recommendation to the select
Okay.
board, something like that.
Great,
Yep,
sounds good.
that sounds
Yeah.
like a
thank
plan.
you.
Thank you, thank you everyone for coming
Yes,
on a
thank
cold,
you.
night. It's warmer in here, but.
This is,
When's your next meeting?
Next Monday night.
Next Monday?
Supposed to say the
Next
meeting.
Monday night, 6 o'clock.
I think
Right
so,
here.
yeah.
Next second.
I don't have a gavel. I can't do it.
The
Oh,
meeting is now
George.
officially closed.
All right.